To introduce our next speaker is Mr. Brett Drummond. He's an MS researcher and science communicator, and he is a co-founder of MStranslate, which translates all the MS research all around the world. He's very well known worldwide. He comes from, he actually is an Australian, but he lives in Switzerland, and he's coming to us via Zoom, and are we all good to accept? Yeah, good stuff. Brett Drummond.
Thank you, Graham. Now, hopefully everyone can see this. I'm going to apologise in advance that my voice is a little shaky today, but hopefully that's all going to work. Thank you for the kind introduction. Thank you for being gracious enough to allow an Australian to join you today. Good sign for World MS Day that we can allow an Australian to come across the ditch, at least virtually. I am actually still living in Australia, Graham, even though I seem to spend most of my time in Switzerland at the moment, or in Europe at the moment, for different work that I'm doing. So I know that I am what's standing between everyone and afternoon tea, so I'm going to keep the presentation short as I can. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Just before I get into what I'm going to be talking about today, which is a little bit of an update on remyelination and myelin repair in MS, I just wanted to give a really quick introduction to MStranslate, just for people there who may not be aware of who we are and what we do. That's a very young photo of me that I'm going to keep using, but this is the team at MStranslate. So my background is in multiple sclerosis research. I did that for many years, but also in science communication. And in late 2012, so almost 14 years ago now, myself, along with my brother Eric, featured in the middle photo here, established a platform called MStranslate, which was really all about communicating updates in MS research to people living with MS and the broader MS community in a way that was easy to understand, easily accessible, but most importantly also scientifically accurate. And I could talk at length about how that's not always the case in terms of things that you read online, but that's definitely the topic for another talk. We've also recently, over the past 3 or 4 years, brought on another science communicator into the team, who you can see here, Dr. Joanna Cobbin. You can find MStranslate basically on all of the social media platforms if you want to follow us and hear about updates in MS research, which is what we're doing. But today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about remyelination. So this image is probably, I'm sure, pretty much everyone in the audience will have seen some image like this as a depiction of what we see in MS. So basically on the left-hand side here, we have a healthy-looking nerve where we have these sort of pinky orangey bits here, which represents the myelin sheath. So you can see that we have the myelin sheath covering this blue, what we would call an axon or nerve fiber going through the middle of it. And so this myelin is really important. It does a lot of different things, but probably the two main things to know is that it helps make sure that the signals that go along nerves travel quickly and efficiently, but also it's there as a protection. So very similar to what you would think about in terms of wires that you might see in the house. You know, that wiring inside always has that insulation around the outside to protect it. Same with our nerves inside our body. And what happens in MS is that the immune system targets that myelin sheath and you get damage. And so that basically has two impacts. One, it stops the nerve signals from traveling as effectively, and so that's why experience a lot of the symptoms that are experienced in MS. But also over time, as that myelin gets more and more degraded, disappears more and more, it exposes that nerve fiber underneath, and then that can start to be targeted for destruction as well. And so over time, that's sort of the neurodegeneration that we see in MS as well. And so there's a lot of focus in research around how can we repair that damage. So all of the existing therapies that we have in the moment don't do anything to try and repair that damage. They all try and stop that damage from occurring. But what we know in terms of this process, if we shift to something like this, is that in a lot of cases where damage to the myelin occurs, and this can happen in lots of things other than MS, so it can happen in concussion, it can happen with viral infections, is that myelin can be repaired. And this image here shows this really cool cell in the middle. It's called an oligodendrocyte, and that's responsible for making new myelin. And we know that even in MS, especially early in the disease, the damage will occur and these cells will come along and repair that damage. But we know that over time, that process gets less and less efficient in people living with MS. And so there's a lot of research now going on to try and understand why that's the case, and how we can overcome it, to potentially have a new therapy to promote this repair process in people living with MS. And so there's lots of different ways that are going on for that at the moment, a lot of different approaches that are being investigated, but I'm going to focus on one, because this was sort of the major clinical trial update in 2025 in this space. So this came off the back. This is a complicated image. Don't worry too much about this. I'm going to talk through it really quickly, but a number of years ago now, there was research that showed that one of the biggest problems in terms of why this process gets less effective is that these cells, these oligodendrocyte cells, become less effective when they get older. So these OPCs, just to explain what we're going on here, this stands for oligodendrocyte precursor cell. Scientists love to have long, complicated titles for everything. They're basically what turn into those cells that we showed in the image before that are helping to make the new myelin. And so those older cells are really bad at turning into those oligodendrocytes, whereas young ones are very good at being able to do it. And one of the things that we know is a really effective way to help slow biological aging is actually intermittent fasting. So I'm going to really quickly go through this initial study that was done in mice, where basically they wanted to see whether or not then this would help promote this repair process. And so what they did initially was that they looked at mice, and they had two different group of mice, one that ate normally, and then one group of mice that only ate every second day. So basically mice that had this intermittent fasting. And what they saw in the mice that were fasting is that they were much better at doing this than the mice that were eating every day. So they were getting this myelin repair after they were given this animal version of MS. What they then wanted to do is see whether or not that could also be replicated therapeutically. And so they did exactly the same experiments, but now using a drug called metformin. Many of you might have heard about metformin before. It's a currently approved drug for diabetes, but basically it helps mimic that process of fasting. And so what they saw in the mice then is that the mice who were on metformin, once again, were much better at repairing myelin. And so fast forward a few years, we went through a global pandemic that slowed down recruitment for a clinical trial, a number of other things going on, but we finally had this phase 2 clinical trial of metformin, the drug that I was just talking about, but also in combination with another drug called clemistine, which had also been shown to be effective at myelin repair. The trial was done at the University of Cambridge in people living with relapsing remitting MS. And the way that they saw whether or not these drugs were effective in terms of promoting remyelination was this test called visual evoked potential. And I don't know if Graham's deliberately put me on after Benson to make me look bad, because Benson could definitely explain this better than me. And I saw that some of his photos that he showed at the end there were actually from at Cambridge, but I'm just going to play this video really quickly and hopefully you can see it. There's a full video on this, but we're going to fast forward. So this is basically what this test looks like. where essentially the person here has got sensors at both the front and the back of their head, and what they're doing is they're measuring the time it takes for a signal as coming through from this flashing checkerboard to travel that distance along the optic nerve. And so if we skip ahead again here to this little animation. So what we have here on the left, so this is a person with no damage to their optic nerve. On the right here is a person with damage to their optic nerve, so optic neuritis or demyelination in that nerve process. So this would be a person living with MS that has that. And if we play this, you'll see a dot move along this, and that's the nerve signal traveling from the front to the back of the head. So you'll see that that signal travels much quicker in a healthy individual than it does in this person with damage in that myelin. And that goes back to what we said at the start, that myelin is really important to help the nerve signal travel quickly. And so fast forward quickly again through this video to the next animation. What they were looking at in this clinical trial was this. So essentially we're going to see a green dot travel along both of these. That's a healthy individual. And then on the left-hand side, we're going to have a black dot from someone who's receiving the remyelination drug. And then on the right, someone who's receiving placebo. And so as we go through this, what you should be able to tell is that while it's still slower, those on the remyelination therapy, the black dot moves quicker than those on the placebo. And that would be an indication that the drug has been effective, that we're helping speed up that nerve signal again. And so to cut a long story short on this, and I know that I'm already running out of time, well, what we did find from that, sorry if that just created a loud bang as I knocked over my microphone, what this did show was that remyelination was possible. So they saw a positive outcome in this clinical trial. There was evidence that metformin and clemistine as a combination could promote myelin repair in people living with MS. And this is now the third trial to have shown that this is possible. So we are getting closer. Importantly, the difference that they saw was very small though, so there's no indication yet that these are necessarily the therapies that we should be using in people living with MS, but it's still a really big step forward to know that this is possible. And now it's around taking the next steps to work out, is it taking these ones that we've seen that can work and maybe modifying them a little bit so that we get a bigger impact, or is it finding other drugs that may have more powerful impact on remyelination, or is it taking these trials and doing them from longer? Maybe the people need to be on these therapies for longer to see a really big impact on this. So this is really positive. It's really exciting. I know this is a really quick snapshot in terms of what's happening. As one final little plug before I go, if you do want to stay in touch with any of these things to make you aware, MS Toronto, we will have the Patient Community Day event again. So this is coming out of the big MS conference every year, where we have a special event at the end of it for people living with MS, where we update on the major research outcomes that have come this year. The conference is in Toronto, so it's actually going to be at a much better time for people living with New Zealand to join us live. And just as a little plug, you never know who you're going to see up on stage at these things, because you may recognize a certain person in the middle of this photo that joined me up on stage at this event in Barcelona last year. So thank you. Very quick. Hopefully I didn't take too much of your afternoon tea break, but thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you very much, Brett. That was brilliant. Cheers, mate.
Thank you.